Going to go ahead and call this meeting of the Whitefish City Council to order for Monday, November 20th. Thanks everyone for attending. We do have some folks joining us remotely via Teams, so welcome to those individuals as well, and thank you for joining us this evening, everyone. We'll start with our Pledge of Allegiance. Phil, would you lead us tonight? Just let the record reflect that Councillor Sweeney is absent and he is excused this evening, and safe travels to both Frank and Paula on their way home. We'll move on to item 3, communications from the public. This is time set aside for you to bring to the council anything that's not advertised as a public hearing on our agenda. So if you are here to speak to our business licensing requirements, please wait until I call that public hearing. Otherwise, now would be your opportunity. Name and address for the record, please.
Ron Gerson, 9 4th Avenue East, Kalispell, formerly of Whitefish. Thanks for councilors and mayor for the opportunity to speak. I'll be brief. You have the unenviable task of addressing and trying to resolve the issues of housing, affordability, attainability, and accessibility in Whitefish. These aren't simple matters and will not be solved with the simple single sweep of a magic wand. I also know that this is not your first, and the council has been looking at solutions for some time. You do have partial solutions in hand from previously legislated rules and regulations, which may help to reduce some of the pressure. Short-term rental rules are one of these. The obstacle appears to be the implementation of these rules to stem the tide of illegal short-term rentals. I've heard that there may be as many as 500 units in Whitefish being rented out for less than legal time periods. I realize that enforcement is not easy, and considering this number, it means that it may be costly and that friends and neighbors may be impacted. This makes it tougher, I get that. On the other hand, not enforcing the rules only exacerbates your problem. It's not always easy to swallow. I recall back in the day, before we had a housing shortage in Whitefish, being miffed that I couldn't rent out my house on the lake for less than 30 days at a time. But the law is the law, and I got over it. Today, in order to respect the rule of law and the good of the community, the affected parties also have to get over it. It is greed and short-sighted self-interest which drives the flouting of the rules, and this will only serve to further aggravate the problem and undermine this community. And in addition, it sets a terrible example for the rest of the valley. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ron. Phil.
Hi. Phil Boland, 12 Green Place, Whitefish. I just want to have a shout out, or make a shout out, that most of us at our city take our city services for granted. Not anymore. Early last Thursday morning, I awoke to a home without any running water. I know I was on auto pay, I checked. So I thought, okay, there's something else. But nonetheless, I went outside to see or hear if there was a major leak in my home that I couldn't detect. I found out that there was a broken main at Grouse Mountain. I want to commend Craig Workman and all his public works crew for their unwavering commitment. Craig and his crew worked for a straight, solid 32 hours Thursday morning through Friday afternoon to repair the water main. He made a commitment to those who were around that they would not stop until the water main was fixed. Amazing. 20-degree weather in the middle of the night, that's harsh. Maybe it could have been worse, but I'm glad it was done. I'm from the board, represent the HOA for Grouse Mountain. I just want to, on their behalf, thank you guys, Craig and the Public Works Department. We really herald your commitment for 24/7, 365 service. It's really been great. As a side note, Joe Page, our former fire chief, is now in Phoenix, Arizona, with his wife, Michelle. So it's been a long haul, so I'm glad he's safe and sound. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Phil. Appreciate the compliments of our Public Works Department.
Hi, my name is David Martin. I'm a taxpayer and permanent resident of 816 Texas Avenue, just north of here. Thank you for your service to the community. I would like to urge you in all of your deliberations to consider the residents first. Consider the residents ahead of the tourists. Consider the residents ahead of out-of-state second home owners. Tonight you have a chance to hire a person to enforce the regulations around Airbnbs, and I hope you take this opportunity to do so. Thank you very much.
Thanks, David.
My name is Bailey McCarvel, MCCARVEL, and I currently live at 242 Gunsight Loop in Kalispell. I am a single mother and a lifetime resident of Montana. I currently live outside of Whitefish city limits, but as my children and family grow, with the limited and egregiously expensive options that do exist, I'm being forced to consider living even further outside of the place I have called home for my entire life. I have jobs plural. I have money to pay rent and still cannot rent within Whitefish. I have a family here, family who have been here for literally forever, as I am a nation's first person. Nevertheless, we cannot afford to rent or buy locally. Even if we could, there are very little to no options available that would fit a family of our size. Locals like myself have been and will continue to be displaced from their hometowns, while local businesses struggle to find and maintain employees. The Flathead Valley is suffering from a housing crisis, a crisis brought on due to wealthy transplants and a lack of housing options for us locals. The lack of enforcement has resulted in approximately 500 illegal Airbnbs in Whitefish alone. That is 15% of housing stock. There is already 325 registered short-term rentals. If anyone was placed in a position to enforce legal versus non-legal Airbnbs, only 6% of housing stock would be Airbnbs. I'm here to ask the City Council to enforce the existing rules around short-term rentals, hire staff to enforce said rules, and educate the greater public as to what those rules are. I will be back at the February 19th City Council meeting to check in on the city's progress, and I expect to see the code enforcement position filled at that time. Know that the longer your community waits for laws to be enforced, the longer your community is harmed by the lack of actions and the dragging of feet. Know that your community is being harmed by your lack of action. Thank you, and thank you for paying attention to this very important issue.
Thanks, Bailey.
Hello, my name is Gabriel Layton, Layton. I live at 303 O'Brien Avenue, literally like probably just a block away, block or two. I rent. Moved back in 2018, fully well knowing what would happen here. Where I was currently living, the Airbnb issue was already there. It's already in effect. Just tried to move back and hit the ground running as hard as I could to get ahead of it financially. I run a lawn care company. I'm currently shutting that down. Lucky enough to live in Whitefish where they make enough money that someone will just poach you and you only have to work for one homeowner. The housing crisis to me is very frustrating because I do want to live here and I'm gonna, but just have to keep making enough money to do so. The illegal Airbnb situation I've seen firsthand in much, much worse manners than we are here. Really all we could probably do is enforce it by fines. I mean, eventually they will all get wise to this, and they'll just switch over and see that the market is actually the second phase where, you know, you try and legislate this, and then what they're going to do is they're going to switch to 28-day rentals, and they're going to start to capitalize on everybody that works here. They're going to rent to you for 28 days, and you will have no choice but to pay it. That's the next phase. You can't get rid of them. They're not going to go away. They're just going to change it to 28 days. In the meantime, before that, we can at least hopefully fine them. And I don't know, you can make money on tickets, but I guess I hope you guys find someone that can fill the job, and I wish you guys the best of luck. I'm just trying to give you the information so you know what happens next. They're not going away. They're going to change it to 28 days, and they're going to start to capitalize on us that live here. That's what happens. And that's what I saw. You can look up Toronto. You can look up Vancouver. You can look up many other states that have rentals. They don't go away. They just get wise to it and start renting month to month. And they just jack the prices up. I wish you guys the best of luck on enforcement and finding somebody to do it, or, you know. That's all we can do.
Thanks, Gabriel.
My name is Susan. Excuse me. My name is Susan Whitworth. I know all you guys have seen me. I come to a lot of the smaller meetings. I live at 265 Colorado Avenue, apartment D10. My housing crisis, I have told to you guys before. I feel like I'm living on the edge now. Our rent went up again, and I'm paying 60% of my salary towards rent. And I feel like this particular place I'm at is so old, you worry about whether I'm the next place that's going to be torn down and we have to leave and go somewhere. There is nowhere to go. I don't care if it's Kalispell, Columbia Falls, we all have the same problem everywhere right now. You know, I just feel like that you sometimes focus too much on the resort and not enough on our community. Our community has taken a big dive from when I first moved here. And it's frightening to think that I could be the next person living on the street or living in my car. I don't want to be, but that's kind of where we're at right now. It's a very serious issue, and some of the things that have come up I disagree with. Some of the housing and the apartments are not going to help people like me or people who are making less than $33,000 a year. I mean, and anyway, I do hope that you guys will enforce the existing rules that are around short-term rental, hire a staff member to enforce the rules, and educate the public to what the rules are. We live here too. It's our home. It's beginning to be not our home, and it's very frightening. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan.
Good evening. My name is Christopher Mueller. That's Mueller for the record, and I currently am lucky enough to reside at 606 Pine Place right here in Whitefish. I came here 6 years ago by way of Portland and then furthermore New Orleans. And all I can tell you guys is I've seen what a housing shortage turns into. It's a crisis, and it affects the community from everything from mental health to addiction to crime to education, to rehabilitation. If you don't think about it now, it will become that problem. Please enforce the existing rules around short-term rentals. Please find more efficient ways to enforce those rules and educate your constituency about those rules. Thank you for your time tonight.
Thanks, Christopher.
My name is Trand Seymour. That's TRAND SEYMOUR. I live at 935 6th Avenue West, Kalispell, 59901. I'm a Flathead resident, but I am a Whitefish native. I substitute teach for Kalispell Public Schools. There I also help run the wood shop. I'm a woodworker. I own my own business, Log Jams Material Lab. I teach adults and kids woodworking. I also run a dad support group in Kalispell. I've worked in at least 25% of the restaurants in the Flathead Valley. There I taught wine education. I'm a certified sommelier. I'm a busy guy. I recognize a lot of these faces from places like Tamarack and Mambo's where I used to work. I'm 36 and moved home last December to take care of two members of my nuclear unit who were diagnosed with cancer. They're okay now, finally. But I live in my dad's basement. I have a 14-year-old son as well. I love my dad and my stepmom a lot, and they love me too, but we drive each other nuts. I don't know when or if I'll be able to afford to move out of that basement. You know, my son's 14, and for most of his life, we were able to share a bedroom together, but how much longer can that last? So that takes a one-bedroom price up to a two-bedroom price if we want our privacy. And I personally don't like being incentivized to get into a relationship just to split rent with somebody. So that's $1,800 to $2,000 a month on top of child support, on top of all the other bills I have to pay, food, gas, life. I don't know what disposable income means. My income is not disposable. I overheard a council member, I don't know who, say that they had taken, sometimes you just have to take a week off. I don't know what taking a week off would do to my already tumultuous life and schedule. It would decimate me. If I get sick, it'll decimate me. If my kid gets sick, it'll ruin my finances. And then I got to choose whether or not I want to be able to pay rent or get my car repossessed. And this is my home. I've been coming back here. I've moved away a few times, but this is home. I mean, we all know in this room, these mountains get in your blood and they don't go anywhere. And I don't know if at some point in time I'm going to be expected to go somewhere else again. And I don't want to. Ever. This is my home. And it means more to me than just a word. Now, I don't know what the solution is. I don't know if it's hiring somebody to enforce these VRBOs. I did construction a lot this summer. I painted and built a lot of VRBOs and cabins and did repair work on a lot of things that I can't even afford to stay in, and I worked on them. And to be able to help direct something that I'm so proud of and know that I'll never be able to stay a night in it, let alone live in it, is a travesty. I don't think anybody in this room is here to blame. You guys are here because you want to help people. And it sounds like you guys have a serious opportunity to be able to do just that and then go home and lay in bed and feel like you did something great for a server, for a construction worker, for a babysitter, for a nurse. So yeah, I hope you guys deliberate today and you hire somebody and you allocate funds for somebody to enforce these regulations on a lot of these Airbnbs and VRBOs that are messing with your friends and your family members and your students. And if you don't crack down on it, it's going to mess with my kid. And I'm already mad now, and I'm the one being messed with. So hire somebody. Allocate more funds to educate more people. It's awesome what you guys are here to do. So show the people of this valley how awesome you are. Please. That's all I have to say.
Thanks, Trent.
Thank you.
My name is Ian Fleming, Fleming. I live at 110 Colorado Avenue, just north of the viaduct. I wanted to come tonight and encourage everybody here to enforce the laws that we have on the books already, the zoning that we have on the books already. I've just moved up here recently, and I managed to hear many of you talking on the campaign trail for re-election about how Whitefish was so forward-thinking and putting laws in place in the 80s to protect us from short-term rentals running rampant in our towns. And that forward thinking is wonderful and great, but we have to follow through. And we're here tonight to make sure that we ask you to follow through, to hire somebody to fill the role, to enforce the laws that we already have, to make sure that people know that we have those laws, to make sure that they're following through for our families, so that we can have teachers, so that we can have firemen, so we can have families living in our neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian.
Hello. I'm here with some facts and a little bit of hope, hopefully. So, Whoa, I'm Amy. I live in Whitefish, 78 Montana Avenue. I'm sure most of you have heard this place referred to as Disneyland at one point or another. I grew up near Disneyland in Anaheim, and my dad was he worked for the city. And in 2016, Anaheim City Council voted to ban the operation of short-term rentals. There were 336, and the population is 300,000. It's crazy. Orange County as a whole is 3.2 million people. So just based on that alone, numbers are crazy here. As of mid-2019, they have 277 permitted Airbnbs. The owners have to be within a certain radius to be there on site within a certain amount of time. The last time I looked at Airbnb numbers here, there were over 600 just showing up on Airbnb. I know people touched on the neighborhood nuisance and housing availability, but I think keeping it local to home ownership will result in properties going back on the market for people that want to live here and contribute to the community, or they can shift to long-term rental. And I am lucky enough to have that. I have a long-term rental from a long-time resident, and I want other people to have that too. I think they should come with a 6-month minimum. And I think the only people that are losing are the people that are actively sucking the life out of this community. And on top of that, lodging capacity was at 60% this summer. So I think if we ban them as much as possible, leave it to local ownership, and push people into the hotels, where, not to sound like a jerk, but where they kind of belong, I don't think that they deserve to live in the neighborhoods like they're here, because they're on vacation. I think it would just help the local businesses as well. It would push people to eat at the local restaurant at, say, Grouse Mountain or Firebrand, and alleviate some of the crazy traffic downtown. And then on a side note, it seems like theft is up, like on the community boards as well. And I think it's because people don't know who's in their neighborhood. There's a lot of transient traveling. I see them in my neighborhood all the time. I've never had a problem with them, but it doesn't mean that it's not happening. So I just think that most of the people that have bought property here as an investment, especially during the pandemic, they don't live here. They're not from this region, and they have zero interest in the health and life of this community. And I think it's time for them to go. So, yeah, that's it.
Thanks, Amy.
Thanks, guys.
Thank
and
you.
gals.
Good evening. Cameron Blake, 825 Lexan Trail in Whitefish. And I know it's been mentioned, but thanks to the foresight of prior council, we have rules in place that limit, and zoning in place that limits short-term rentals to less than 20% of our housing units. Disregard of that zoning and a lack of enforcement has led to a multitude of illegal rentals, adding to our crisis in housing availability and affordability. And we can kick lots of numbers around, but I know I went on Airbnb last week and I could point to a number of houses and looked up the zoning, and they weren't in zones where they should be renting. They were in neighborhoods. Moving these units back to long-term rentals will increase our rental stock and reduce rents, and that's been documented most recently in Irvine, California, and also New York City. When they banned certain short-term rentals, or a bulk of the short-term rentals, they've already seen rents go down with the increase in supply. Some of these may be sold if investors bought them, which this has been mentioned too during the pandemic. Great place to buy an investment property and rent it out short term, even though they don't realize it's illegal. And the thought is that some of those could go back on the market as well and add availability and supply for those who need to buy houses. But to have this happen, the city needs to continue to prioritize and get the word out that illegally operating short-term rentals will not be allowed and the zoning regulations enforced and fines levied. Per the city manager report, I'd like to encourage you to direct the hiring of an enforcement position and approve the ordinance amending the business licensing. Thank you.
Thanks, Cameron.
Good evening. Happy holidays to you.
You too.
My name's Tyler Pitcher. I'm from Kalispell. And I have a couple of ideas and just some things that have happened to me while I've been up here in Kalispell, but also a couple solutions in that for you tonight. I owned Costa Vida in town for a few years. We sold it about a year ago. When we first bought the property, I knew that I was coming to a resort community, and I had lived in 2 other resort communities prior to coming up here. And I chose, when I came up here, part of our business plan was to build employee housing for our staff, and we did build it. During the time that we were building it, another company came in and bought out a portion of our parent company, and they didn't want it. So I said, the keys are available. This is all yours. There's no one here to work. I went to work many times, and 2 and 3 and 4 people would call off the individuals, and I'm sure that there's a bunch of people who've probably worked in the service industry, maybe some of yourselves as well. But at the end of the day, when you've done a big day's work and a quarter of your staff calls off, what do? You know, when we take in to build a business, you look at metadata, right? You're looking at how much traffic goes past a certain location, how many homes are within 3 miles, what's the disposable income, the tax base, so on, and you say, hey, this is where I'm going to put a business. This makes sense. But the thing that we don't look at in the metadata, and I think all of us are nearsighted on this a little, is the simple fact of labor participation rate. Labor participation rates, everyone from 16 to 65. And you're never going to get to 100%. I think the majority of the United States sits between 65 and 70%. In the Flathead Valley, we're in the 40s. What does that mean? That means that 40% of us are providing the services for 100% of us. 60% of us are not. And it's not that they're not willing to work or they're not in the labor force or whatever. It's that they've already raised their children. Go to the grocery store. Look at who's in the valley. Look at who's at their restaurant. They're 45 plus. They've already raised their children. They've already raised and had their families, and they're coming here and buying a second home. Ladies and gentlemen, we are a resort community, and I knew that when I came up here. So, problem. How can we solve it? This is 20 years ago, I lived in Teton County, Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and in that area, they require businesses to buy, build, or subsidize. At the time, it was 15% of your employees over a certain amount. I don't know the amount. They recently, about 5-6 years ago, changed it to 30%, and they wanted to change it to 50%. So meaning that any business that wants to come in to Teton County, granted it's all basically Jackson Hole or the ski resort, they have to build, buy, or subsidize housing for their employees. I talked with Lynetta, who's one of the organizers here earlier today, just wanted to get some of her thoughts as well. And one of her concerns is that if we did do something like that, what does it mean to the employee? How do we enforce something in that line? And right now we have 4 or 5 businesses that offer employee housing. For the entry-level worker, it is virtually impossible. It is virtually impossible for them to be able to find affordable housing. What we were offering was $300 a month. We would have been able to house half of our staff. I got the idea from a wonderful lady in Teton County. Her name's Clarine Law. She's one of the county commissioners and a representative of the state. Didn't know who she was. I sat and was waiting for keys to get to go mow the lawns on one of her 15 properties in the valley. She owns 5 hotels and a handful of homes. Didn't know who she was, but she wanted to talk to me that day, and I'm glad that she did. And I told her about my life and so on and so forth. I knew who she was in the community, and when I stood up to walk away, I said, well, my name's Tyler. What's yours? And she's like, Clarine. I'm like, good to meet you, Clarine. And I'm like, Clarine Law? And she's like, yeah. And I'm like, oh, we got to talk. I worked for her for 3 years. Almost 100% of her staff works in those hotels and those businesses are staffed, and she is a great employer. If it had not happened for me, and I had not had that, I worked 3 jobs while I lived there, paid $170 a month, had great housing. If that had not happened, I would have not had the opportunities that I have today. It would have never given me the ideas and the scope and the ability to look and see what I can do. Full disclosure, ladies and gentlemen, I own rentals. I own long-term and I own short-term rentals. And I'm giving you that arrow for a reason. Colorado Breckenridge, what they're doing right now is they're taking their Airbnbs and they're charging a per room fee per year, anywhere between $500 to $1,500 per room per year. So I have one of my units is a 2-bedroom, 2-bath. That means I would pay $1,000 up to $3,000 a year to be able to have access, to be able to be an Airbnb. And what they're doing with these funds, not them alone, but there are other communities that are doing this. I'm amalgamating or merging a couple ideas here. Stowe, Vermont, Park City, other resort communities, what they're doing is they're taking these funds and making affordable housing. There is no way to turn off Airbnbs to make housing affordable. You have to try a different approach. I'm asking you, ladies and gentlemen, to tax me. And you're really not taxing me, because if you charge me a $3,000 fee for my Airbnb, who really pays it? The tourist does. I'm asking you to tax the tourist. You and I won't pay it. And the nice thing about this is because elected officials, you don't have to come to the table with a gun at your head raising taxes on individuals. You can promote it as a way to tax the tourist. They take these funds and they offer, and this would be a great thing for the police and fire and EMS and other teachers and the like. What they do is they give 1% loans for 40 years so that people can afford housing in these local environments, in these local areas. There is no way for you to go buy. I just saw a house, 2-bedroom, it's just around the corner over here, 1 bath for $668,000. Looked at it before I came up here. It's a $5,000 a month mortgage for that at 8% right now. On a 40-year note, 1%, it takes it to $2,000. Who couldn't afford that now? In doing this, there's causes and effects, and there's more to probably talk about. Maybe I'll talk with others outside of this meeting, but long and short, there's more of an opportunity within Airbnbs to be able to take care of those who cannot get to the next step than it is to turn it off. I know that's not what we want to hear, and I know that that's not the angle that everyone's taking here, or some have taken already at the pulpit today, but if we can tax the tourist, take these funds, be able to make them, think of what you could do in your police force and your fire department over there, gentlemen. If you had firemen or police and or teachers in EMS in the county that you could give 1% 40-year loans to them so that they could afford to stay here, could you help solve some of your shortages? Could you find better individuals? Would they stay longer and support the community better? Think of individuals who you would have to take and put this money into buckets, and I'll end with this thought. You have to make it available to teachers and EMS and county employees. It can't just be Whitefish. It's got to be the whole valley, because if you turn it on over here, you're just going to force Airbnb renters into my market, which is what the proposals and stuff you're looking at right now. I'm actually in favor of what you're doing very much, because it's going to benefit me. That tourist dollar is going to leave Whitefish and is going to spread out into the rest of the valley. It's just cause and effect. So back to this last thought. If you have these buckets of funds available to you, make some of it available to EMS, fire, teachers, and the like. Stabilize what you've got and be able to staff your departments. They're the individuals that help create the foundation of everything that we want in our civilization. Second, have to make them available to businesses so that they can take, and rather than just make one home for one individual, if we gave it all to individuals, they could make multiple. And if you have 150 businesses that have employee housing, now the employee can go to somewhere where they don't have to worry about bed bugs or a poor landlord or a poor employer. They have more options. You have to diversify it. And then lastly, we've got to make it available to citizens who qualify, administered by banks just like FHA loans, and be able to actually help people. We cut oil and gas and coal and timber from state lands. Those tax dollars help subsidize everything that we wanted within our cities and our communities. We don't have those dollars anymore, ladies and gentlemen. I ask you to tax the tourist. Thank you.
Thanks, Tyler.
There. So, good evening, Mayor and City Council members, and thank you for the time that you dedicate to our community. For those of you who have not yet met, my name is Alyssa Ayler. I'm lucky to reside. Oh, I'm so sorry. My name's Alyssa Ayler, and I reside at 27 Park Avenue in Whitefish. I'm the new executive director at Flathead Families for Responsible Growth, and tonight I would like to speak on our behalf. As you are aware, as we have heard, many communities across the country are facing the negative effects short-term rentals, STRs, place on the housing market, and Whitefish is no exception. The exact number of illegal SDRs operating within Whitefish city limits continues to be unclear, but it is vastly understated from figures usually that are reported. As evident from public testimony tonight, residents have voiced their concerns about SDRs in their neighborhood, and yet many of these rentals are persisting. They will continue to persist unless there is adequate enforcement. We need to address this issue promptly and must allocate any resources necessary to identify and rectify the problem. The need to hire a short-term rental officer has already been established in the 2022 Whitefish Community Housing Roadmap, and I understand that the city was already in the process of hiring this position and ran into challenges based from other Senate bills that have passed. This ordinance would not only require registration of all SDRs within the city, but also would secure the sustained revenue needed to hire this enforcement officer. The 2022 Housing Roadmap also identified the need for 1,310 homes by 2030, 900 of which need to be priced below the market rate. To achieve these targets, we need to be creative, and we can't rely solely on new construction to meet our community housing needs. Encouraging the conversion of short-term rentals to long-term rentals is by far the most immediate and also the gentlest means of meeting our housing needs. By initiating stricter enforcement now, we anticipate that some of these illegally operated STRs will turn into long-term rentals or then be placed back up on the housing market for sale, adding the much-needed housing stock to our supply. This approach offers an opportunity to add housing stock without increasing housing density, traffic congestion, or also straining the existing infrastructure. Beyond increasing housing stock, enforcement of regulations would also safeguard the unique character of our neighborhoods. The City of Whitefish has specified areas for permitted SDRs to operate, and in order to preserve the vibrant, friendly atmosphere of our neighborhoods, it's crucial to enforce these zoning regulations and not expand the size of these permitted areas. On behalf of FFRG, I implore you to take the first crucial step by approving this ordinance, and then subsequently ensure the rigorous enforcement of the regulations put in place. We recognize the urgency in addressing our community's housing needs and ask that you also expedite the process of hiring an enforcement officer. Ultimately, the success of these efforts will depend on creating effective enforcement now and continued community engagement in the future. I just want to say thank you to you and also the community for showing up this evening, and I just want to say, let it snow. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Alyssa.
Hi, thank you for your service. I'm Flower Bartholomew, 27 Colorado Avenue. A little bit off the cuff here, sorry, because I've been working because I don't have any employees, because I have held the hand of countless of employees who have been forced out of their rentals. Yeah, because, jacking up the rent, selling it, and it's a real crisis. I feel like it's causing a breakdown in our community. I own a small landscaping business, and I've had to figure out ways to move 300-pound rocks with, pipes and like they did in the old days. It's strange because in 2020, when I started, I had like a crew of 6 readily at my disposal, and now I'm lucky if I have one part-timer, and it's really, it's all about the housing because I'm a pretty good employee. I pay a living wage. I'm pretty easygoing, but it's real, and it's I'm one of the lucky ones. I moved here 29 years ago, and lucky enough to have built a house, and actually I'm trying to figure out a way on my 1/8 of an acre to try and house an employee. But it's, yeah, that's all I got, but thank you.
Thanks, Flower.
Good evening. My name is Allison Hackala, and I reside at 640 Questwood Court. I do live in a short-term Airbnb rental zone, and I strongly encourage you to expedite the process of hiring an enforcement officer. I do have short-term rentals directly in my backyard, and they are legal, and so I definitely have a heart for a lot of the affordable housing issues, but also those of us who currently do reside in the zones that are having trouble. So I have tried to call the enforcement officer at the city about a lot of noise complaints. I've tried to call the police. There have been over 20 reports that myself and my neighbors have submitted based on noise on a random Tuesday night at 2 a.m. I've tried to talk to the renters. I've tried to talk to the managers. I've tried to talk to VRBO and Airbnb. It's really, 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 really frustrating not to have somebody that I can help me enjoy my neighborhood, my community. So, thank you.
Thanks, Allison.
Good evening. Rhonda Fitzgerald, 412 Lupfer Avenue. First of all, congratulations to all of you for being reelected to your positions where you do a great job, and I appreciate you every other Monday night, at least.
Most times.
No, I do. I think it's important to point out that you guys have authorized this enforcement officer for a number of years. And so it isn't for lack of understanding how important it is. I know that you do, and I know that it's at the top of your annual priority list as well. But I think what people are saying to you is that the community is really at the breaking point. I looked at AirDNA in August, and in August there were upwards above 780 short-term rentals available in September in the city limits, because different ones come online for different dates, but at that time there were more than 780 short-term rentals in the city limits during September. So that's a lot of illegal short-term rentals. And I think it's the most important thing for people to understand is that you are going to enforce the code. You have a really good code. You did all that hard work. And I think right now there are a lot of people basically being kind of scofflaws because they all know that there hasn't been enforcement. And so that just saying you're doing it and moving forward is going to have a huge benefit right away. And we talk about how to get more available units that are affordable, but a lot of these were affordable units that have gone out of the affordability category. Hopefully some of them will drop back in. But I think the best thing you could do is to move forward forcefully and say you really mean it. And I think that that would be a huge breakthrough for the community. And I thank you so much for all your hard work.
Thanks,
Appreciate
Rhonda.
it.
Bree, anyone online wishing to provide comment?
I'm going to be the one to ask if there's public comment, just since it's our first time and we didn't have anybody join last meeting. So for those online, if you have public comment that is for items not on the agenda for the public hearing that is scheduled later, please raise your hand and we'll let you unmute your mic. So I see first, Ed, if you'd like to unmute yourself, you have the floor. Ed, I can unmute.
There it is.
There you go. Okay.
Did you get me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Oh, cool. Ed Doctor, own the Tap House and this Tamarack Ski Shop in dire need. Just want to say thanks you guys for everything you do, for sure. Except Steve, you didn't help me figure this out, but I figured it out how to get on here. I'm really stoked at this public comment. I think we're getting somewhere. I'm just saying that I'm supporting you guys hiring somebody. I think you probably know that, but I think we got a call to action on this stuff, and it makes me feel great, and I'm super stoked you guys are helping out. Again, I just support hiring somebody, and go for it. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Ed. Anyone else, Dana?
Nope, it looks like we're good.
Great. Any volunteer board reports from the audience? How about the council? Not seeing any. We'll move on to item 5, our consent agenda. You have the special as well as regular meeting minutes from November 6th. Can I have a motion, please?
Yes,
Giuseppe?
Mr. Mayor, I move to approve the consent agenda.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor, please. Rebecca?
I have one correction. Page 61, it was about the snow clearing, and I had said that it was 10 o'clock, but I think Craig said it was noon that people had to clear their snow by. Is that correct, Craig?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so on page 61, there'd be one correction from 10 o'clock to 12 o'clock for snow clearing.
All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that carries unanimously.
I will recuse myself from that vote.
And let the record reflect that Councilor Davis did recuse himself from the vote, so the motion does pass on a 4-0 roll call. That brings us on to our one public hearing of the evening, which will be item 6A, and will be ordinance 23-29, an ordinance amending the city's business licensing provisions to reflect the new business registration program, and this will be on a first reading. Dana.
Good evening, Council and Mayor. In 1982, the city established its business licensing provisions in accordance with state law. Really, we haven't made we've made very few amendments to that program since its original adoption, and most recently, the actual code updates were done in 2010, where we made a business license site-specific as part of our zoning compliance process. Since then, we did update business licensing rates, with that most recently done in 2021. During the 2023 legislative session, Senate Bill 262 was approved and signed into law, which prohibits a local government with self-governing powers like Whitefish from requiring additional licensing when the state is the original issuer of the license. Our current business licensing provisions state, quote, "No provision contained in this chapter shall be construed so as to license any trade, business, occupation, vocation, pursuit, or profession or entertainment prohibited by the Constitution or laws of the United States or the Constitution of the state of Montana." However, to clarify that we aren't licensing, we would like to change this to a business registration program, so that it's clear it's a registration and not a license. Within this ordinance, with the code changes we're proposing, we're working to clarify the purpose of the business registration program, which is to promote public safety, as well as assist the city in our efforts to ensure compliance with other regulations and ordinances. Keep in mind, this is already happening now with our business licensing program. What we're doing is collecting information, what type of business it is, names, emergency contact information. We already have fire inspections required, and for certain businesses at a certain interval. But what we're doing here is making sure that we can still get that contact information, because we use this to basically enforce our resort tax requirements. Short-term rentals is another one. But we also know that there's other public safety measures we could be expanding. And for us this year, we're recommending that we also look at having contractors be required to show proof of general liability insurance of at least $300,000 per occurrence to protect our Whitefish residents when it comes to construction projects of that type of nature within city limits. This is based off of Missoula's program. There are a couple exceptions as well, but when it comes to plumbers who are licensed by the state, for example. But this is really important so that you can ensure that our building, while we do have a building code inspection program, this actually just helps make sure that our residents are protected further. We've actually added into this section of code the requirement for a fire inspection by our fire marshal. Short-term rentals has its own requirement under zoning code, but it made sense to put this under our business registration process because that's really when that is done. It's on an annual basis. Registration would be updated annually with new contact information, potentially new owner, and then we would have those scheduled. We would also have other types of businesses that would be scheduled for fire safety inspections. There's state law about schools, there's state law about other types of businesses that need to have regular inspections, but also being able to create a better program for the safety of our residents, visitors alike. We did have two sections that we've proposed to remove of this code section. The first is a somewhat outdated provision requiring lodging facilities to not only maintain a guest registration list, which really isn't the issue as much as the part of keeping that list in public view. I was shared some information of how registration requirements could be important for hotels to keep a guest registry. So that might be something we consider later on. But again, under resort tax, you have to be able to prove how many night stays and people. So I still feel that we do have some coverage in those areas specific to those code sections. We also removed the license revocation section. Because this is not really a license program, we're looking at more as a registration program. We're recommending that we remove this revocation section. Resort tax, zoning requirements, and these provisions will still provide a means of enforcement through fines and penalties, and they're addressed under each section of code. Realistically, we did this because when the legislature was going on, Senate Bill 262, which is very broad language applying to cities with a charter, like a self-governing powers like ourselves. This does not apply to all cities and towns, which is questionable why the state targeted self-governing powered cities. The comments were that, cities were using these licenses to revoke business. They were revoking the business licenses because of something they didn't like. So if we get away from that section and we're just saying, we want you to register, because we already have the fines and penalties under each section of code that we're trying to enforce. This just gives us the contact information, essentially. It really isn't changing our and to be clear, we haven't revoked a business license since I've been here. That has not actually happened. It's at the city's manager's discretion, but oftentimes instead we'll go the route of civil citation through the penalty, go through the court system before we even look at revoking a business license at this point. It's very hard to go, you can't really lock the doors of a business. And so that's really all we would be able to do. So to complete this whole changeover, though, just so you know, this is like the first step where we're addressing the city code that covered business licensing, now hopefully business registration. We would then come back at your December 4th meeting to adopt fees for this registration, because it does cover the costs of administering the program, fire safety inspections, and whatnot, overhead costs. And then we would work through some other code updates to remove referencing to business licensing, because there are certain codes that reference the revocation of a business license. So there is no added financial requirement related to the adoption of this ordinance. And the rates that we will be proposing at the December 4th meeting, we anticipate to be very similar to the rates we already have in effect. And so, because it's based on cost. So staff does recommend that the City Council adopt the proposed ordinance, thereby amending our current business licensing provisions to reflect the new business registration program. And I do want to make one quick note that there is another bill that we are aware of that was House Bill 283. And in that, they did clarify that we're not allowed to license landlords or regulate their activities. To be clear, that is for long-term rentals, 30 days and longer. For short-term rentals, we would require a property manager or landlord to still register their short-term rental. But we, even today, do not require property managers or landlords to register for long-term rentals. But they did add that into the section again under self-government powers, just for our city's clarification, I guess. So we're not in violation of that section as well, because short-term rentals do not fall under the Landlord-Tenant Act. So with that, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thanks, Dina. Any questions for Dina? Ben?
Could you just recap for me, Dana, what was this bill that was passed at the legislature that this is in response to, and what was the purpose of that bill?
So it was Senate Bill 262, and the only added language was where under section 71111, which is powers denied for a local government unit with self-government powers, they prohibit any power to require additional licensing when the state is the original issuer of the license. That was, and it's very interesting, we asked for clarification to say, is that professional licensing? Is that all licensing? When it was presented in the House and voted on, it was very clear that it was related more to the professional licensing, realtors. There are specific areas of state law that call out like lawyers, chiropractors, dentists, you can't require licensing of them. And then they also brought up short-term rentals though, and that short-term rentals couldn't be licensed. So we're not requiring a license, we're requiring a registration. We have which is different. We're saying this is just collecting data. We have we're collecting your emergency contact information. Through this process, we're going to be looking at your zoning. Are you in compliance with your zoning? We'll be looking at, enforcement of resort tax essentially, but without this process of registration, and I will say staff considered putting this under our resort tax code, but there are still, you also have zoning compliance issues too that you have to deal with. So it was better to keep it under its own section. But that was the bill this is in reaction to. And so it's very important, for the public to know, the state has really changed laws during this past session that have made it more difficult for us to enforce, the rules that we've already had in place.
Thank you for that history. There's a section that was added that has a broad exemption that basically says any licensed professionals by the state of Montana, including but not limited to, are exempt. How are contractors not fitting under that broad exemption as they are also licensed by the state?
So we haven't addressed, so contractors, we're still requiring it. There are some that are specific that we're exempting, like plumbers, licensed plumbers, but contractors aren't quite licensed the same way in our opinion, and that this is really a public safety measure for our contractors where it's not a license again. We're asking them to show proof of liability insurance and give us their contact information. They actually have to really provide that data already to our, and they have to show their, it's not called a license, what is that called? Their registration that they have with the state, being a contractor, a registered contractor with the state. They actually already provide that to our building department because we have a building code enforcement program.
Gotcha. And that was going to be my next question was, you do mention the construction contractor license being a requirement if you have employees.
Mm-hmm.
But if somebody doesn't have employees, it doesn't apply to them?
That was language taken from Missoula. I don't understand. We'd have to look to see if that needs to change, but I assume they're trying to look at, what's the safety aspect here, and it's really a public safety measure over a licensing issue.
Yeah. And so, but will the building department though be checking the contractor registration for everybody?
So nope, this will fall under our finance department, who already manages the business registration or business licensing program. So it would be, they would apply, and we'd have a separate form for our contractors like we do now, and then we have a separate form for short-term rentals and for general businesses and home occupation. They're all 4 separate.
Thank you.
Further questions? Rebecca?
So Dana, at one point we had over 2,000 businesses registered or licensed with us, right? So are we still up that high?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I imagine we're probably around that number. That includes contractors as well, so contractors that work within the city limits.
Okay.
But I don't see that we've had a significant decrease. Short-term rentals, we are 374 registered short-term rentals right now.
And then HB 283 that says landlords are not allowed to be licensed or registered for long-term rentals. So that's anything 31 days and beyond.
30 days or longer, so that's our interpretation of state law, where it defines a tourist home separate in a different section of code. There's obviously concern, or there's differing opinions, as we know, and with our litigation pending right now with short-term rentals, where they're arguing that we can't regulate short-term rentals essentially because of the Landlord-Tenant Act.
All right. I like the addition of the fire inspections for everybody. Thank you.
Further questions? Andy?
Yeah, Dana, I think I understood all this correctly. We really only, things that were licensed by the state already were the things that we lost the ability to license with our city business licensing program. We could have still had a city business license for a retail store, for example. It didn't require any state licensing, but what we're doing here is we're just bringing everything all under one label of registration. City business licensing goes away, really nothing changes,
Exactly.
except we changed the name.
We changed
And we
the
eliminated some
name
things.
and we removed the revocation of
Yeah.
the license, and that's where the registration, and because we were never, the licensing and registration, our zoning really calls out where you can put what type of business, anyways, so this is more about, the registration process with the city, so we have a good list of who's operating in Whitefish. Yep.
Giuseppe.
Yes, thank you. Dana, what was the license renewal requirement? Was it annual?
Yes, and it is still annually.
But in the past, the license was to be renewed annually?
Yes, correct.
So why did we have a revocation clause? All we needed was not to renew.
You could revoke it mid-year, essentially.
And now this time we have decided to lighten the load by removing the revocation of the registration.
Correct. And I think, Angie and I have discussed this, being able to deny a registration would not also occur. We would be registering where they would be in violation would be under each section of code that may apply to that business, and we'll follow through under those sections.
Okay, so if I look at your red line, we are mostly simplifying the previous ordinance with the exception of 3 additions. We're putting specific language to anything rented below 30 days per time, specific language to exemptions by clarifying or by outlining that state licensed businesses such as, but not including 2. And then we have added in 3-1-7 2 paras about proof of liability insurance and explicitly requiring fire inspection, which was already required. Am I correct?
Yes,
Okay.
the fire inspections were generally required. For short-term rentals, yes, and other businesses we do look through, but this is going to be more of we're growing that program to be more expansive. at
Okay,
this point.
so the concepts that have not been digested when the first ordinance was written are these 3 additions. Short-term rental looked at as businesses, the exemptions. So on the exemptions, I have a question.
Sure.
Why specify a number of types of business, and why not include federal licenses?
So these are, so federally, we kind of cover that in 311 where we're not licensing anything that's prohibited by the federal law. To my knowledge, this is a state allowed, so the state has, there's a whole section of code that is different from where they put this prohibition on the city of Whitefish that allows business licensing. But within the city, or within the Montana code, there are specific occupations that have been explicitly exempted from that main code area. So those are the ones that are actually listed here: chiropractors, attorneys, real estate agents, insurance professionals. This was to give some idea of what it would be. So these professional licensing agency, or those that have professional licensing from the state.
And my question probably was more about, often we put in the ordinances pursuant to state law. I was wondering why this time we didn't just say pursuant to state law exemptions and leave it so we don't have to change this ordinance. If a new type of business gets licensed at state level, then it's not captured by this exemption. That was my question.
Yeah, it says including but not limited to, and if the licensing changes at the state, I would assume this also would change, but it just gives an idea. These are the ones that like council has made decisions on in the past, or they've been identified as ones that we don't license already. But I'm open to if you guys want to do a language change. But I feel that it is flexible enough as written that if it changes at the state law, this would be okay.
Thank you. And the third addition, which is a change, this is probably the clearest change from what we had so far, which is contractors must provide proof of general liability insurance with per occurrence limit of at least $300,000, et cetera, et cetera. My question here is, in case of claim, if we, the city, involve ourselves in this chain, I think we could be more, it's more a statement, we could be subrogated in a civil financial lawsuit. Do we really want to be part of this?
So this kind of we went, Missoula has done this. Many of the cities that have business licensing have a requirement for contractors to have some type of insurance. That is our safety program for them. We don't do a fire inspection for a contractor because they're working on the job sites. They don't have a location here necessarily. So I don't believe so. This is at least $300,000. It's setting a standard for Whitefish, but it's not setting a maximum. So I think it still is up to the homeowner, who they contract with, and their determination of what liability they really need to require. We are just simply saying the minimum standard of liability. It's the same as when we do a special event and say, yeah, we'll approve your special event. We've got to have at least $1.5 million of liability insurance. So I think it's just a requirement how a business is operating in Whitefish. Again, we don't have a means of fire inspection. We do have a building code inspection program already, so we're tied into building construction review already.
Anything further from the council? We did advertise for a public hearing on ordinance 23-29, and we'll hold that hearing now. Any public comment on this matter? Dana, anyone online by chance?
We do. For those of you online who'd like to provide comments regarding the business licensing provision changes to a new business registration program, please raise your hand by using the button at the top of your screen. I think we're good.
Good. I'll go ahead and close the public hearing and turn it back to the council for a motion. Andy.
Mr. Mayor, I would move to approve ordinance number 23-9, an ordinance amending the city's business licensing provisions to reflect the new business registration program on a first reading.
Is there a second to the motion? And that'll be 23-29. Seconded by Councilor Quinnell. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that motion does carry unanimously. Bree, thanks very much. Dana, we'll turn it back to Craig Workman now for item 7A, consideration of approval of a rating panel and selection committee for the Safe Streets for All Plan, Water and Sewer Master Plan, and Railroad Crossing Elimination Plan. Craig.
Thank you very much. I'll give you the cliff notes of my staff report because we've all been through these consultant selection processes in the past. So Public Works will be working on, as you mentioned, 4 different planning efforts this fiscal year. We were awarded a Safe Streets for All, or SS4A grant, to complete a comprehensive safety action plan. The completion of that plan will allow us to apply for future construction grants to complete safety improvement projects such as street design changes, multimodal improvements, signage enhancements, speed management and traffic calming projects, and many more. We will also be working on water and sewer master plan updates. These will provide updated comprehensive understandings of the city's water supply and wastewater collection systems. These plans are intended to provide a roadmap, if you will, for our future needs in establishing priorities. Both of those plans will involve heavy coordination with the current growth policy update that's currently underway. And then we also received a railroad crossing, or RCE, program grant. This program promotes safety and efficiency in the national rail network and provides funding for railway crossing improvement projects. The current budget for the Safe Streets for All plan is $200,000, which will be funded by a $160,000 grant and a $40,000 city cash match. The combined budget for the water and sewer master plans is $200,000, and that will be entirely funded through water and sewer revenues. And the budget for the RCE plan is $500,000, which will be funded by a $400,000 grant, $75,000 in BNSF funds, and $25,000 in city funds. So, in accordance with the city's policy for consultant selection, we need to establish both a rating panel and a selection committee. I recommend that council appoint myself and Karin Hilding to serve as the rating panel for these planning efforts. And then the selection committee, which is where you guys come in, will need to have the department director, one other staff person, and one elected official on each of those committees. So I'm recommending that you guys appoint myself and Karin and one council member to serve on the selection committees for these 4 planning efforts, but I'm really thinking it's kind of 3. You'd have a Safe Streets committee, a railroad crossing committee, and then a water and sewer master plan committee.
Great, thanks, Craig. Any question for Craig on his staff report? We will need a motion to that effect. Rebecca?
I make a motion to approve the rating panel and selection committee for Safe Streets for All plan, water and sewer master plan, and railroad crossing elimination plan.
Is there a counselor that would like to volunteer to serve on this committee?
I would do it. I mean, if nobody else wants to. Are you interested? No.
Go ahead.
I like it. I mean, they probably don't want me, but I like doing it. I've learned something every time I
If they don't want Rebecca, I can do it too.
Okay.
So there will be 3 separate sets of interviews.
Yeah.
So it could be one counselor in all 3, or it could be separate counselors on
Why don't we
each
appoint one alternate? Giuseppe, do you want to be the alternate? Okay.
Okay.
So we'll appoint Rebecca to serve on the selection committee. Giuseppe can be the alternate along with Craig Workman and Karin Hilding. Is there a second to that motion? Seconded by Councilor Fury. Further discussion? Please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and the motion does carry unanimously. Bree. Thanks, Craig. You have Dana's report enclosed with the packet, including her request that we authorize to engage the hiring process for the code enforcement officer to address short-term rentals and Airbnb operating illegally in city limits. Dana, anything else to report on?
I might just also make a note of the wage study that I included a request for proposals that has been drafted that we'd like to issue. Keep in mind, and this is something we've kind of thought about internally, is like once we move forward with this, there's really no going back. But I think it's something that's very important for us to do as we look at 2 upcoming union negotiations in the spring, as well as just knowing, how cost of living and CPI and how we've had to adjust wages over the past couple of years has been different than our typical process. But when it comes to the short-term rental enforcement, I do want to just make a few comments about things I've heard this evening. We haven't gone without enforcement for this entire time. We have had some minor enforcement. We have a short-staffed finance department, which really was doing any proactive research. And since we had a retirement, we really haven't had somebody in that seat for the past, or since July. It will take us some time to hire this position. We don't have a job description written, but we will go through that process and classify it in accordance with our personnel practices, and if approved. And currently, just to clarify the numbers that have been reported, I did meet with actually a company called Granicus. We were looking at short-term rentals, a software basically as well, and they recognized 705 units, short-term rental units in Whitefish city limits. They do extend their boundaries a few hundred yards. So I know there were some picked up that aren't in city limits just based on where they were on the lake. We only annexed the lake bed in some of those areas. But regardless, we do have 374, so that does leave 331 unregistered units. I also did notice they had some in areas where I believe that those are 30-day rentals. They're listed as 30-day rentals, even though they're on Airbnb and VRBO. Specifically where I live down near Montera, I know that the HOA is very much proactive in enforcing their regulations. And when you go on and actually check the listing, it might come up as a 30-day rental. So this is stuff, though, that this position could really be helping us do proactively. The risk really comes down to the funding is there right now based on our business registration program, hopefully going through second reading and the fees being adopted. It comes down to the litigation and the potential changes at the legislature in the next session, because we would have to fund this solely by, we could potentially have to fund it by property taxes, because right now it's really funded by short-term rental registration fees.
We will need thanks, Dana. We will need a motion to that effect. Let's get a motion on the table first.
Question for Dana, too.
Okay, we'll start with questions. We'll go with Steve and then Rebecca.
Is this a full-time position?
Yes, it is. And this would include more than just short-term rental enforcement. This is going to include resort tax enforcement as well. This position is already funded partially by property taxes, to be clear.
So it's going to be in the finance department, not in the
It might still fall,
building or?
well, under planning where our current code enforcement is. We haven't quite decided where the supervision is going to fall under. It might make sense to have this work with our other code enforcement officer, but it will be more related to resort tax, the finance side, and short-term rentals, because our legal department just does not have the time to go through the civil citation process. This position we would work on, similar to what we've done like with our beach rangers, make it so that they can and have the ability to issue a civil citation and move through that court process, because that's really going to be our mechanism on enforcement. And so, again, we won't be held up by too much work in the legal department. We'll have somebody proactively looking and enforcing. And then we can also look at our resort tax, which is non-short-term rentals. There's other businesses that actually have failed to pay resort taxes that we can also utilize this position for.
Okay. I mean, I'm trying to, if we have a software that kind of rounds these things up
We
for
don't have a
us.
software. I should clarify. I had talked to Granicus as an option, but the software itself is $42,000 a year. And so you're looking at,
So we're
you
not,
still need a person, really, to help with that. And so I don't know that that software is going to be something we proceed with.
okay.
Also, the fees for the short-term rental fees were developed to pay for this position. It already accounts for it.
Right.
And so without hiring it, we probably have to look at reducing those fees.
Okay. And I'm just trying to puzzle in my head how this becomes a full-time position.
I envision this position is going to have to, I mean, there's going to be a lot
There's
of
going to be other
upfront
jobs
work.
for that person to do.
What was that?
There'll be other jobs for that person to do in the
There
finance
will be
department or
from code
wherever they are.
enforcement.
Okay.
Yes, we will have ample code enforcement. You know, we can always increase our code enforcement efforts. But, you know, this position, I see them managing similar to what Bozeman has. They have a website. You know, right now, we don't really have much on a website, a complaint system. You know, being able to really create this into a bigger program than what it is now. And Bozeman's done a really great job. They have really good examples online of how you can file a complaint and where you can find a list of registered STRs, where you can find somebody, you know, you can identify where they should be or where they are. So up front, this is going to be a very heavy position. As it goes on time, and say we've gotten to where enforcement's groovy and great, that's when we could see them working toward other code enforcement.
Okay.
I can tell you, you know, when it comes to snow or weeds or any other code enforcement, we have plenty of need.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Rebecca.
Yep. Whoops, I'm already on. Sorry, you guys. So we've always had short-term rental enforcement, right? I mean, because I know since I've been on council, we've had 2 software programs that we tried. We've had 2 people, I thought, that were assigned to do the role. It's just that we haven't been very successful at catching the people that are not compliant. Isn't that right? So we've been doing this for years. It's just got really out of hand, especially through COVID and all that, probably.
Yeah, so what we found was the software didn't, which that software at that time I think was closer to 16,000 a year, was nowhere near what we're quoted now. That software really didn't provide the information that we needed to move through enforcement. It was essentially something that we could have had somebody do. We still had to go and try to figure out where the property was and all of that. So that really wasn't a helpful software. We did have our code enforcement officer working on short-term rentals as much as we could. Then we found that they were focused on other code enforcement that was, much more higher need at the time when it came to snow plowing, weeds, and they were also part-time building inspectors. So we really only had a half-time code enforcement officer. We did add a part-time in finance. There was a part-time position. It was increased to help with the proactive searching for illegal short-term rentals, but not really the enforcement all the way through. And that position, though, with the growth of our city and just changes in what we've had to do administratively in the finance department, that position has had minimal time to really do proactive enforcement. And it just shows that, growth in the city, number of phone calls, number of bills that we're having to receipt through that position, which is the front office person, has just increased substantially to where that's the priority over short-term rental enforcement. So yes, we've had individuals assigned to it in the past. I don't think I could say that it's always been proactive enforcement. It's more reactive to complaints.
And then I was going to bring up tax evasion once again, because we can go after people that are not paying resort tax on short-term rentals, but do we notify the state about the bed tax evasion, or how does the bed tax that is supposed to be paid to the state then would not be being paid? So there's two taxes that would be illegally not being paid. So do we do that, work with the state on that piece?
We do not work with the state on the collection of their tax because they won't work with us on resort tax. I think if there was a cooperative agreement that they found somebody not reporting state tax and they were in the city of Whitefish and should have reported resort tax and they weren't, I would be open to working with the state to have that back and forth. But at this point, it's their regulations. We don't have the jurisdiction to enforce their tax. So we look at our resort tax only.
That might be something good for the legislature. And then the third thing is, would it be possible to advertise a map in the newspaper, for instance, that would show the public where short-term rentals are legally allowed? I know everybody's online, but it might be good to just have a visual like that.
Yeah, so you can find that on our website. I don't know the impacts it would have by just putting it in a newspaper, but again, this position can look at, and we haven't come up with the title for the position. I don't often like to use the word code enforcement officer. I mean, it does sound harsh and it might be the right thing, but this also could be more of a short-term program like manager or something like that, a coordinator, because it could be where they're working on communication, working on what are our rules around short-term rentals, being more of a community-oriented, like here's where we allow them, here's where we don't, and help our community. You can get messaging out there too, and how it could help housing in Whitefish. And so I think, again, I don't know that I see the benefits in putting in the newspaper, but if council directs us to, we will.
I think it would be helpful, but it's just my idea, so.
I'd certainly appreciate a motion to begin the hiring process for a code enforcement officer on short-term rental enforcement.
So moved.
Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
I think Ben beat you, Andy, so I'm going to give that one to Ben. Further discussion?
I have a couple comments about it. I think, I'm sorry, I don't want to extend the meeting, but we have to be realistic about what code enforcement does with this. It's definitely absolutely necessary. We also need to, and it's necessary from our end of things. It's also necessary for the public to understand that it's partially your responsibility to report these things to us so that we know where these things are, because it's easy for anybody to look at a map, but for a city official to go out and try to enforce the code in that area and catch whoever is there, we can't do that without a complaint. It's a complaint-driven process. So we are going to do our part, and we've been trying to do our part and trying to make that happen, and the public needs to understand they need to do their part as well and let us know, because we can't do anything that we don't know about. We also need to make it more painful, I think, or not more painful, but we need to have a stricter process for even legal short-term rentals, and I'll have some ideas on that in the future.
Thanks, Steve. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that motion does carry unanimously. Bree, thanks very much, Dana. Item number 9, consideration of canceling the second meeting in December, which is scheduled for December 18th. We typically and traditionally have always canceled the second meeting in December unless something imperative comes up at our first meeting in December, as was the case, I believe, last year, which was the first second December meeting I've ever had to attend in 18 years. So very unlikely, but I would entertain a motion to cancel the December 18th meeting.
I move to cancel our December 18th meeting unless something out of the ordinary comes up.
Thank you, Steve. Is there a second? Seconded by Councilor Fury. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. And that's unanimous as well. Bree, we'll move on to councilor comments. I'll just start with our work session item, which was our summer camp program. I know Liz and Maria and Dana would appreciate some feedback on which option the council would like to proceed with, option 1, 2 versus 3. Any thoughts? Ben?
I have learned firsthand how difficult it is to have two working parents trying to work and trying to raise a kid at the same time. It is tough. For whatever reason, America makes it pretty difficult to do that. For the staff at the city, I think the benefits that are provided to the staff are a big reason why a lot of them are there. The city has good benefits. It may not have the highest pay in the entire valley, but at least has good benefits, and I think that's a good thing. So I'm looking at this. I appreciate that this was brought forward. I think it would be the right thing to do for the staff of the city to help with childcare. It is a very difficult time for that right now. So personally, I'd be open to option 1 or 3, depending on what folks want to do, but I would personally vote for option 3 because I think it's a reasonable cost, and I think we have the funds in there to do it right today without infringing on other priorities that we have. So
I'll take that as a recommendation and a motion to adopt option 3 as presented by staff. Is there a second? Seconded by Councilor Norton. Further discussion? Steve?
I just want to say that I think we could do a little more work on this rather than just have these 3 options. I agree with Ben. As somebody who's been through this process, it's very difficult to get childcare in this country, in this valley, especially places that have seen explosive growth. I was in Hawaii when I was having to find childcare for my children. I don't think it's fair that everybody gets free childcare because that works for the city, because there's a striation of salary ranges for people who work for the city. And I don't think it's too much to ask that certain people pay 10%. If you're making $150,000 a year in your family, $150 a day is probably too much to ask, but 10% of that, $15 a day, is not too much to ask. And Maria, I understand your objection of, well, we don't really know what it's going to look like every year. I get that. I understand that it's hard to plan and budget that way. And at the same time, I think that being a parent comes with certain expectations of what you have to do as a parent, and I object to the fact that it would be free for everybody within the city. I think everybody should have to pay at least a nominal amount, and I think 10% is a fair amount to ask to pay, despite the obvious administrative headache that it might cause. So I don't support option 3 as it is. I think we could look at it and say, if you're at this end, you do have to pay 10%, or maybe you can even afford more than that, because that's just what you have to do. And as somebody who lives this every day as well, because unfortunately, teaching has become childcare, and I work with a lot of teachers who have children. And we created our own daycare in Kalispell for Kalispell teachers only, and it's not free. The teachers have to pay to have their children there. So I just think, as a matter of course, it doesn't make sense to provide it at no cost for city employees in any city or in any public role. So that's just my feelings on the matter, and so I won't support option 3.
Other comments, Rebecca?
Yeah, I support it because it went through the whole entire park board and they unanimously supported option number 3. And like I said, after our work session, childcare disproportionately affects women more than men. Through COVID, a lot of women had to leave the workplace because there was nobody to take care of the kids. Men still make a quarter more than women. And I think it's really important to give people access to childcare so that they feel confident to show up for work, don't have the stress of placing their children. And I don't think for $13,000 it's really that much money, and it's a wonderful benefit for our staff. So I still support option 3.
Further comments? All those in favor of adopting option 3, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign. And for the record, that does pass on a 4-1 vote with Steve Quinnell voting in opposition. I do share with you that Frank Sweeney was in support of option 3 as well for the record, although he's not here tonight to vote. Maria, is that sufficient direction?
It is. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Tell Liz, very nice job tonight. It's great to have her at the work
Thank you.
session.
And you will have that come before you again as a resolution to adopt
Great.
officially. So you'll have another opportunity.
Thanks, Dana. Start to my left this evening with closing comments. Andy, anything this evening?
No comment.
Thanks. Rebecca?
Just congratulations on all the grants that the staff has written. And then I told Dana I would bring this up. Bridger did get a pretty good-sized grant to pay for our school officer part of it. And so I was wondering about animal interactions, because we do have chronic wasting disease in Yellowstone Park. And Dana filled us in a little bit, Bridger, that we don't meet the threshold to do a study, have a actual program. But we still are doing bear management activities, and I'm just wondering what the chances of that money that was going to go to the school officer into a person like we talked about at one point that would be doing animal control interactions, and how far out that might be, if you guys still think it could possibly work.
I'll start from the financial side. I'll let Bridger talk about operationally. From the financial side, it's important to note that our budget for police was spending down pretty significantly, actually, in the FY24 budget. So this was really going to help bring us back to levels that were not. Basically, it's important to note this position, while budgeted, wasn't truly funded for ongoing costs. So this is going to help fix that. For a future position to add for animal needs, I would say we look at that in the next budget cycle, but I'll let Bridger speak to that operationally.
For sure, and we do animal enforcement for domestic animals. I think you're kind of relating wild animals. Is that what you're referencing?
Yeah, I feel like with climate warming coming, it's gonna hit us quickly. And so I just was wondering if we need to start preparing staffing and funding now so that we're set up for it when it happens in more dire circumstances. Okay, that's probably a bad thing to end the evening on, but
So just to update on the current process for our urban deer population, we're still looking at that. We need to have the biologist's approval and direction to go forward with implementing a deer management plan, especially to cull deer and do those type of things. So there's still options out there. We're still working on it. it's not the easiest thing to do, and I think we have to make sure that we understand what our population is before we can start mitigating that. And the counts and the assessments, there's a science to it, and the biologists are working. There's some private companies that are doing some assessments with Salish Kootenai, I believe, but that comes at a cost, and that most definitely might come to the council to look at that route, to do a further, more detailed assessment of the issue we have in Whitefish, as well as our issues. Not only it's not necessarily created with residential deer, but those deer that come into our tourist deer that come in from outside of the county that aren't being mitigated as well, because there's an abundant amount of wildlife outside, immediately outside the Whitefish jurisdiction as well. So it's an ongoing process. We'll continue to work with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. They're all for it as well, but the numbers are what the numbers were with our first assessment. So we'll continue to look at it.
Okay, thanks, you guys. It's just, I keep poking the bear kind of about it, just so that we're prepared when things change. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. Ben? No comments. Thank you, Ben. Steve?
I just want to wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving. It's my favorite time of year to get together with family and friends and think about when we used to ski on Thanksgiving Day. So,
or even skin.
Yeah, or skin. Maybe it'll get enough snow up there. Anyway, but just happy Thanksgiving to everybody.
Thanks, Steve. Giuseppe?
What Councilor Cunell said.
Thank you, Giuseppe. Dana, who's our facilities manager for City Hall in particular? His or her name?
Ben, who just Ben just moved on to new employment, and he was fantastic. So we are in the process of hiring our facility maintenance.
Probably a position that doesn't get recognized very often, but I was walking the halls tonight and just wanted to give a shout out to Ben and previous facilities managers for keeping this place in top-notch shape. So,
and Tony does a great job. He helps, keep it clean.
Tony's great,
and Tony also helps our facilities maintenance tech.
Tell him thanks very much from the council, if you don't mind. And I think that's all I had. Anything further from staff?
Yeah, because I forgot to turn it over to Craig. He has something.
Great.
Yeah, just to follow up on Phil's comments, Phil, I appreciate that very much. And I want to reiterate my commendation for the staff that worked on the water main break. In 20 years of fixing water mains, I haven't seen one like we had the other night. But just as sort of a public service announcement, we did lose about 300,000 gallons of water during that process, which drained the upper grouse tank to nearly zero. And so we've added a little more chlorine to the system just to recirculate. It's also a time of year where we need to, per DEQ standards, maintain at least 1 milligram per liter of chlorine in the endpoints of the system. And when we're not moving that much water, we do need to add a little more chlorine to make sure that we keep that residual. So if you guys hear any comments from residents about, my water smells like a swimming pool, I assure you it's safe to drink. We still maintain safe levels of chlorine, but there might be a little more than normal right now. So
Great. Thanks very much, Craig. Yeah. And kudos to your crew as well. Anything further from council? Happy Thanksgiving. We're adjourned.